1981 is one of the most misread years in the history of black music. Disco had just collapsed, loudly, suddenly, with a hostility that was never entirely about the music. MTV was about to launch, and it was not going to play black artists. The major labels were in the middle of a quiet panic, trying to figure out what came next and which artists were going to survive the transition. And in the middle of all of that uncertainty, in that specific window between what had just ended and what had not yet begun, R&B and soul produced some of the most extraordinary music of the entire decade. Songs that were sophisticated, sensual, emotionally precise in a way that pop music almost never allows itself to be. Records made by artists who understood exactly what they were doing and did it with complete and total confidence regardless of what the industry around them was going through. Some of these songs charted. Some of them should have charted higher than they did. All 12 of them deserve to be heard right now, with the full context of where they came from and exactly why they still matter 40 years later. This is 1981, and it sounds like this. Number 12, Roger. I Heard It Through the Grapevine. 1981. Number 12, Roger. I Heard It Through the Grapevine. 1981. When you hear the title of this song, a specific version arrives in your head immediately. Marvin Gaye. 1968. One of the most emotionally devastating performances in the history of Motown, a record so definitive that even the Creedence Clearwater Revival version, which was a massive hit in its own right, exists permanently in its shadow. Roger Troutman did not attempt to compete with that version. He did something more interesting. He dismantled it. Roger was the leader and creative force behind Zap the Dayton, Ohio funk collective that had been developing one of the most distinctive sounds in R&B throughout the late 1970s. The talkbox, the vocoder-adjacent device that routes the voice through a guitar amplifier to create that robotic, pitch-shifting effect, was not invented by Roger Troutman, but he perfected it. He made it emotional in a way that its previous users had not fully explored. He made it feel like a second voice rather than a novelty effect. His version of I Heard It Through the Grapevine takes the familiar lyric and the familiar emotional premise betrayal, specifically the particular devastation of learning the truth from everyone except the person who owed it to you, and filters it through an electro-funk arrangement that was completely alien to anything Norman Whitfield had imagined when he wrote the original. The talkbox vocal does something specific here that is worth paying attention to. It creates distance. The emotion is present. You can feel it in the rhythm, in the arrangement, in the urgency of the groove. But the processed voice holds it at arm's length, which, if you think about what the song is about, the experience of receiving devastating information secondhand, of being the last to know, is actually the most honest way to perform it. Roger Troutman was not covering Marvin Gaye. He was having a conversation with him, across time, across genre, across two completely different relationships to vulnerability and expression. That conversation is worth hearing. But before we go any further, if nobody ever told you about this channel, think about how close you came to never finding this. Don't let that happen to somebody else, and don't let it happen to you again. Hit subscribe right now. Turn on notifications, because where we're going next in this story, you cannot afford to tap out. All right, now back to it. Number 11, Yarbrough and Peoples, Don't Stop the Music, 1981. Number 11, Yarbrough and Peoples, Don't Stop the Music, 1981. There is a specific quality that the greatest R&B records of this era share, a quality that is almost impossible to manufacture and extremely easy to recognize when it is present. It is unhurriedness, the refusal to rush, The confidence that the groove is strong enough to carry the song without tricks, without acceleration, without anything extra arriving to compensate for something that was never missing. Don't Stop the Music has that quality from the first measure. Kevin Yarbrough and Elisa Peoples were a husband and wife duo from Dallas, Texas, who had been developing their sound for years before this record found its audience. The production is clean in the best sense of the word, every element present. Nothing excessive, the whole thing breathing at exactly the pace it was designed to breathe at. What most people do not know about this record is the journey it took to reach them. Don't Stop the Music was not an overnight success. It built slowly, the kind of record that spreads because people keep telling each other about it, rather than because a promotional machine pushed it onto the charts. Radio programmers in certain markets held on to it long after the national conversation had moved on. Club DJs kept it in rotation. The audience for this record was loyal in a way that spoke directly to the quality of what they were responding to. Yarbrough and Peoples would follow this record with Guilty. In 1986, another record that found its audience through patience rather than force. They were not flashy artists. They were not built for the MTV era that was dawning around them. They were built for listening, for rooms where the music was the event. And in those rooms, this record was perfect. Number 10, Chaka Khan, What Cha Gonna Do For Me, 1981. Number 10, Chaka Khan, What Cha Gonna Do For Me, 1981. By 1981, Chaka Khan had already been one of the most gifted vocalists in American popular music for nearly a decade. The Rufus Years, the record she made with that band throughout the 1970s, had established her as a live performer of extraordinary power and a recording artist with a technical range that most of her contemporaries could not touch. What Cha Gonna Do For Me is the title track from her fourth solo album, and it is the sound of a woman who has fully internalized everything she learned in the previous decade and is now deploying it with complete authority. The record moves between jazz, funk, and soul with an ease that disguises how difficult that movement actually is. Most artists plant their flag in one genre and stay there because crossing between them requires not just technical facility, but a deep enough understanding of each tradition to know where the boundaries are and how to cross them without losing the emotional thread that holds the song together. Chaka Khan understood all three traditions at a cellular level. She had grown up in them, she had worked inside them, and by 1981 she was not navigating between genres, she was inhabiting all of them simultaneously. Which is a completely different and considerably rarer ability. The album this track came from also contained her version of A Lover's Holiday and her extraordinary reading of We Can Work It Out. It is one of the most consistently excellent records of the entire year. And it is substantially underseen in the broader conversation about what 1981 sounded like. Go find the full album. The title track will bring you in. The rest of it will keep you there. Number 9, Denise Williams and Johnny Mathis. It's Gonna Take a Miracle, 1981. Number 9, Denise Williams and Johnny Mathis. It's Gonna Take a Miracle. 1981. The original, It's Gonna Take a Miracle, was recorded by the Royalettes in 1965, a girl group record on MGM produced by Teddy Randazzo, arranged with that specific mid-60s sweetness that the best of that era wore so naturally. It charted modestly. It was a good record. It deserved more than it got. And then it largely disappeared from the mainstream conversation. 16 years later, Denise Williams and Johnny Mathis found it, and what they did with it is one of the more quietly stunning moments of the entire year. The pairing on paper might seem unlikely. Denise Williams had established herself as a contemporary R&B and soul artist. Her 1977 debut, This Is Nisi, had produced Free, one of the defining records of that year, and her vocal style was rooted in the gospel-inflected soul tradition that ran through everything she recorded. Johnny Mathis was a different generation entirely, a pop-jazz balladeer whose career stretched back to the late 1950s, and whose aesthetic was built around a kind of romantic elegance that lived somewhat apart from the R&B world. What the combination created was something neither of them could have produced alone. Williams brought the urgency, the gospel heat, the sense that this was a song that meant something physically, as well as emotionally. Mathis brought the restraint, the precision, i.e. the ability to hold a note in a way that made space for what was coming next, rather than simply occupying the available air. The production by Jack Gold is immaculate, sympathetic to both voices, without flattening either of them. The arrangement gives every moment room to breathe. This is a record about two extraordinary vocalists discovering that they were better together than apart. The original Royalettes record was wonderful. This version is something else entirely. Number 8. Smokey Robinson, Being With You, 1981. Number 8. Smokey Robinson, Being With You, 1981. There is a specific challenge that faces any artist who has been making exceptional music for 20 years before their biggest commercial success arrives. The challenge is this: the record that reaches the widest audience is almost never the most representative record. It is the record that arrived at the right moment. With the right sound, on the right radio format. And the weight of that success can reshape how everything that came before it gets understood, flattening a complex, evolving body of work into a single point of entry. Being With You was Smokey Robinson's biggest solo hit. Number 1 pop, number 1 R&B. Produced by George Tobin with a warmth and a simplicity that matched the song's emotional register exactly. It reached audiences who had not been paying close attention to Smokey's solo career, audiences who knew him from The Miracles, who associated him with the 60s and the Motown sound, and who were genuinely surprised to discover that he was still making records this good. What those audiences were actually hearing was not a new development. It was the continuation of a creative voice that had been producing extraordinary work since the late 1950s. Smokey Robinson had been writing and recording at an exceptional level for longer than most of his 1981 listeners had been alive. Being With You sounds effortless. That is the highest possible compliment you can pay a record of this kind. Because effortlessness at this level is the product of decades of work. You do not arrive at a performance this assured, this warm, this completely relaxed inside its own emotional truth without having spent 20 years learning exactly how to get there. The song was written for Kim Carnes, who recorded a version that was never released. Smokey kept it for himself. The music industry should be grateful he did. Number 7. Luther Vandross, Never Too Much, 1981. Number 7. Luther Vandross, Never Too Much, 1981. Every great solo career has a first statement, A debut record that announces not just what the artist can do technically, but who they are, what they believe music is for, what emotional territory they intend to occupy, and how they plan to occupy it. Never Too Much is one of the great first statements in the history of soul music. Luther Vandross had been a presence in the music industry for years before this record. Session work, background vocals, a stint singing in a group called Change that produced the 1980 hit A Lover's Holiday, a record that introduced his voice to a wide audience without attaching his name to it. He had been circling the center of the industry for almost a decade and accumulating experience in developing a production philosophy that was, by 1981, fully formed and waiting for the right moment to be deployed. That philosophy was specific, and it was radical for its moment. Luther believed that soul music deserved the same production values, the same sonic sophistication, the same attention to arrangement and texture, and the relationship between voice and instrumentation that pop and rock productions were receiving. He did not believe in the false hierarchy that treated R&B records as secondary concerns. As products to be made quickly and cheaply, while the serious production resources went elsewhere. Never Too Much sounds like a man who has been waiting to make this record for a very long time and knew exactly what it was going to sound like before he walked into the studio. The production is lush without being overwhelming. The arrangement supports the vocal rather than competing with it. And the vocal itself, that voice, that extraordinary instrument, is deployed with a confidence and a precision that makes the record feel less like a debut. And more like the work of someone who had been doing this for decades. He had been, just not under his own name. Never Too Much was the beginning of one of the great solo careers in American soul music, and it announced that beginning as clearly and as completely as any debut single ever has. Number 6, Quincy Jones featuring James Ingram, I Know Corrida. 1981. Number 6, Quincy Jones featuring James Ingram, I Know Corrida. 1981. 1981 was the year of the dude, Quincy Jones's album that became one of the most celebrated and most awarded records of the entire decade. It won 5 Grammy Awards. It produced multiple charting singles. It demonstrated, with complete and utter clarity, that Quincy Jones, at the peak of his production powers, was operating at a level that almost nobody else in the industry could approach. I Know Corrida was the lead single, and it introduced James Ingram to the world. James Ingram had been doing session work, the same apprenticeship path that Luther Vandross had walked. The same invisible labor that kept gifted vocalists circling the industry center without breaking through to its surface. He had worked with Quincy Jones in a session context. Jones had heard the voice, had understood what it was capable of, and had made a specific, deliberate decision to build a record around it. The title comes from a 1976 film. The production is a masterclass in the kind of sophisticated pop-funk that Quincy had been developing across his entire career: jazz harmonic sensibility, funk rhythmic backbone, soul emotional temperature. All of it integrated into something that did not sound like any of its individual components, but drew on all of them equally. James Ingram's vocal on this record is astonishing, not in a showy way. It's in the way that matters more, in the way where every technical decision serves the emotion of the song. Rather than demonstrating the singer's ability. He was 28 years old. He sounded like he had been making records this good his entire life. The commercial career that followed 100 Ways, Ya Mo Be There, Baby Come to Me was significant and real. But I Know Corrida is the moment where the full scope of what James Ingram could do was first visible to the world. Go back to the beginning. It still sounds like the future. Number 5. Kool and the Gang. Take My Heart. 1981. Number 5. Kool and the Gang. Take My Heart. You can have it if you want it.
Yeah. See, darling, there's no time for
1981. The story of Kool and the Gang in the early 1980s is the story of one of the most successful creative reinventions in the history of R&B. And it is a reinvention that almost never gets discussed on its own terms, because the results were so commercially overwhelming.
you and I. Found myself asking you.
That the process that produced them tends to get overlooked entirely. Kool and the Gang had been a funk and jazz funk group since the late 1960s. Robert Bell and his brother Kalis Bayan had built one of the most musically sophisticated ensembles in the genre, a band that could play
If you want it, you can have it, don't you know that?
genuinely play in a way that many of their contemporaries could not. Jungle Boogie, Hollywood Swinging, Spirit of the Boogie. These were records made by musicians who had a serious relationship with jazz and funk as disciplines, not just as commercial formats. Then in 1979, they added vocalist James J.T. Taylor, and the band shifted. Taylor's voice was smooth, warm, and immediately accessible in a way that opened the group to audiences who had not been paying attention during the funk years. Ladies' Night in 1979 began the run. Celebration in 1980 made it undeniable. And then Take My Heart in 1981 demonstrated that the run was not a fluke, that this new version of the group had the songs, the production, and the vocal identity to sustain a commercial presence across multiple years.
And baby, it's yours, yeah. I've got to give it.
What often gets lost in the commercial narrative is the quality of the band underneath the hits. Robert Bell's bass, the horn section, the rhythmic architecture that made even the most polished pop soul production feel grounded and physical.
Giving you all my love.
James J.T. Taylor was the voice that brought new audiences in. The musicians behind him were the reason those audiences stayed. Take My Heart is a perfect example of what that combination sounded like when it was working at its best. Smooth enough to reach everyone, tight enough to satisfy anyone who was paying close attention to the details.
While I was sleeping, baby, had a dream of.
Number 4. Ray Parker Jr. and Ray Dio. A Woman Needs Love. 1981. Number 4. Ray Parker Jr. and Ray Dio. A Woman Needs Love.
Don't get yourself into thinking that she.
Just Like You Do. 1981. In 1984, Ray Parker Jr. recorded Ghostbusters. And that record, that enormously successful, culturally ubiquitous, legally complicated record, did to his reputation exactly what so many of the songs on this list have done to the artists who made them. It consumed everything else. It became the answer to every question about who he was and what he had accomplished. Before Ghostbusters, Ray Parker Jr. was one of the most complete musician-producer-arrangers working in R&B. Not a featured vocalist who happened to have good material. Not a producer who fronted his own group as an afterthought. A guitarist of serious technical ability who had done session work for Stevie Wonder, Barry White, Marvin Gaye, and the Rolling Stones specifically on It's Only Rock and Roll. Before he was 25 years old. He formed Radio in 1977 and built it around his own production aesthetic, clean, melodic, rooted in the pop soul tradition, but with an attention to guitar arrangement that reflected his session background. Jack and Jill in 1978 was a genuine hit.
Just like you do.
You Can't Change That in 1979 followed it. A Woman Needs Love is the peak of what he built with radio. The production is immaculate, every element placed with the precision of someone who has spent years understanding exactly what each instrument contributes to the overall picture. The guitar work is present without being flashy. The vocal performance is confident without being ostentatious. The whole record is an exercise in the kind of disciplined craft that makes complexity feel like simplicity. This is who Ray Parker Jr. was before the world decided he was the Ghostbusters guy. This record is the evidence, and it is worth considerably more than a theme song.
Don't kid yourself into thinking that she done.
Number 3. Diana Ross and Lionel Richie. Endless Love. 1981. Number 3. Diana Ross and Lionel Richie. Endless Love. 1981. Some records arrive at the intersection of two careers at exactly the right moment, when both artists are operating at their individual peak, and when the combination of their specific strengths produces something that neither could have made alone. Endless Love is one of those records. Diana Ross had been one of the defining voices in American popular music since 1964. Her work with the Supremes had made her famous, her solo career stretching from Ain't No Mountain High Enough through Love Hangover and Upside Down. Had made her a genuine institution. By 1981, she was one of the most commercially successful and most recognizable artists in the world. Lionel Richie was at a different but equally significant point in his trajectory. He had spent the 1970s as the primary creative voice of the Commodores, writing and producing their biggest records, developing an ability to craft pop ballads of enormous commercial reach that would define the next phase of his solo career. Truly was coming. All Night Long was coming. The biggest years of his commercial success were still ahead of him. Endless Love was written for the Franco Zeffirelli film of the same name. Richie wrote it and produced it. And then, critically, understood that the song needed a second voice that could match the emotional scale he had built into the melody and lyric. The result was the #1 record of 1981, 9 weeks at the top of the Billboard Hot 100. A record so embedded in the cultural memory of that decade
That's right.
that it requires genuine critical attention to hear it clearly, to strip away the familiarity and recognize how precisely constructed it actually is. 2 voices, 1 song, the right moment. That combination almost never produces a record this good. When it does, it tends to last forever. Number 2. Rick James, Super Freak, 1981. Number 2. Rick James, Super Freak, 1981. If you have been following this channel for any amount of time, you already know what is coming. Because Super Freak is precisely the kind of record we have discussed in other contexts. The crossover hit that introduced an artist to mainstream pop audiences, who then assumed it was the beginning of the story. When it was actually several chapters in. Rick James had been a consistent hitmaker on the R&B charts since the late 1970s. You and I, in 1978. Mary Jane, one of the great funk records of that year. Give It To Me Baby, which actually charted in 1981 in the same release cycle as Super Freak, and went to #1 on the R&B chart. 7 R&B charting records before Super Freak crossed over to pop audiences. 7 records, a career that was already substantial on the charts that black radio was built around. And then Super Freak happened. The record is a masterpiece of its specific genre, funk, at its most accessible, its most physically immediate, It's most unambiguous about what it wants from the listener. The guitar riff is one of the most recognizable in the history of the form. The production is tight and live and completely confident in its own appeal. It does exactly what it sets out to do with no wasted motion. MC Hammer sampled it 11 years later for You Can't Touch This, and introduced it to a third audience, most of whom had no idea where the sample came from or what Rick James had built in the years before it. Super Freak is a great record. It is also the record that made the world forget everything that preceded it, which is the story of this channel in miniature. Know the record. Know the catalog. They are not the same thing. Number 1. Prince. Controversy. 1981. Number 1. Prince. Controversy. 1981. Controversy. There's a reasonable argument to be made that 1981 is the most important year in Prince's entire career, not the most commercially successful that comes later, with 1999 and then Purple Rain, not the year of peak critical consensus, but the year where the foundation was most clearly visible. The year where, if you were paying close enough attention, you could see exactly what was being built and understand that nothing like it had ever existed before. Dirty Mind had come out in 1980 and established Prince as something the industry did not have a framework for. He played almost every instrument on the record. He wrote everything. He produced everything. The sound was funk and rock and new wave and R&B and none of those things simultaneously. And it made the people who needed to categorize it genuinely uncomfortable because it refused every available box. Controversy arrived in October of 1981, and it was a direct response to that discomfort. The title track opens with a recitation of the Lord's Prayer, layered over a synthesizer groove that sounded like nothing that had come before it. The lyric is a meditation on identity, on being categorized, misread, reduced to a set of assumptions by people who had decided what he was before they finished listening to what he was actually saying. He was 23 years old. The album as a whole is Prince working out the full scope of what he intended to do. The political content, the sexual content, the spiritual content, to all of it refusing to separate into the neat categories that would have made it easier for radio programmers and label executives to process. It is an album that demands to be taken whole. Controversy sits at number 1 on this list, not because it was the biggest commercial record of 1981. It was not. Not because it was the most perfectly produced. Several records on this list have stronger production by conventional measures. It sits at number 1 because it is the record that most completely captures what 1981 actually was in black music. A moment of transition, of uncertainty,